Welcome to Pedagogy Power in Primary English. It's another episode with your host, Carla Williams, the author of Mastery in Reading Comprehension, a guide for primary teachers and leaders. We have got two exceptional guests on this week's episode. We have Sian Collinson and Allison Riley, both of whom are consultants in literacy from the Literacy Company. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting us. It's really exciting to be able to come on and do this with you.
And combined, both of you have over 20 years of teachers' experience, which I'm certain is going to form a part of our discussion because, you know, experience, nothing beats it, really. I understand, Alison, you're more Key Stage 2, and Sian, you're more Key Stage 1. So together you've covered the full lot, haven't you, including early years, is that right?
Yes. So we tend to, that's where we've taught before, and then as working together now, we do have that coverage, and it's nice to be able to support each other and support schools being able to give that whole breadth of experience. So
this brings us to what we're focusing on today. We're going to be looking at how to get writers to be creative in our classrooms. Now, that's such a tricky area of the national curriculum, creativity. And often, certainly in my experience, and I'm not certain if you found this as well, when I've gone around to look at lessons being delivered and the outcomes of writing, teachers are always struggling with innovation versus creativity and wondering whether or not they're innovating too heavily, the children are, or if they should be going off on a tangent and writing as though they're experts, kind of thing, without without much input from the teacher. It's that balance, I think, that has formed a really tricky part of delivering writing outcomes for creativity. What's your opinion on that?
I think we'd agree that it's something that we often see as well. And so when we're looking at books, like you said, it's either very close to that model and you see a lot of the same in the books, or children have written creatively. And I used to find this quite a lot in year one, reams and reams of writing that has no real structure. So yes, I think it is about finding that balance. So when we talk to schools and we work with schools, we want to get the children inspired through hooks to their writing. So making the use of videos, films, objects, artifacts, people coming in to really get that imagination and that creative flair fired up. And I think you mentioned that purpose for writing as well, so they really know about that purpose for writing. But balancing that off with, if you're wanting them to write something at the end, they need to see those models. So making sure that they do have those built up, because what sometimes creative writing can lack are some of the vocabulary and grammar skills. So I think the way that we tend to work is that, yes, you have that, I suppose, that impetus for writing. Everything we do is from high quality picture books, which you can probably see. We've got a whole library of them behind us.
Yeah.
That's what gets the children interested in writing, and then the teacher picking out what's going to make the writing effective in terms of, as I said, grammar, vocabulary, skills, because they need both, don't they?
And I think even that happens to adults as well. When you're writing creatively, you're not thinking too much about grammar, are you? And necessarily about spelling. Naturally, you will just go into a flow of getting your ideas out on paper. So I totally understand the challenge that children will face in terms of being able to say, okay, I'm writing, but I've got to remember to include my grammatical skills. And, you know, for some children, that can be quite restrictive. Have you got any suggested strategies that teachers can use so that children do have grammar to the forefront of the things that they're meant to be including while still being able to get their ideas out on paper?
Yeah, it's a good question, that, and that's, we kind of use a mastery approach. So we believe that, and I think it's kind of along the lines of what Sian was saying, really, that you kind of need to build up to a final piece of writing. And what we would do is we kind of recommend that teachers just slim down exactly the grammar focus that they want the pupils to use. So rather than kind of trying to be able to do speech marks correctly and be able to do fronted adverbials and noun phrases when they're creating a story, that they just pick one thing they want them to do well. and then give them the opportunity to practice it in shorter pieces. So I think sometimes that's the step a lot of people miss out. They do a lot of grammar, a lot of discrete grammar teaching, and then they don't give them that practice time before they're expecting an extended piece of writing. So what we would recommend for teachers is, let's say you're writing something like some form of recount. So maybe they're going to write an extended diary and role as a character, that they would practice along the way with things like writing in role as a first person viewpoint to recount something, or writing a letter. So it's all still a recount skill that's going to build to that end one, but allows them that chance to practice, for example, those fronted adverbials over and over again. So then when they come to do that more extended or final piece, they've got that, they've got it, it's almost like a natural thing that they would want to use. They've mastered it.
When we talk about our short bursts of writing as well, we talk about the genres they're familiar with. So we don't want you to then have to lose lessons having to teach the features of a newspaper report. Stick to what they can do, a diary, a letter, instructions, and just have that repetition. We've been saying to a lot of schools, strip things back, let the children be successful, so they're not, don't set them up to fail by giving them some genre that is just too difficult a concept.
Balanced arguments.
Balanced arguments.
And when you're doing moderation, and the tears come when you realize a year 3's writing a newspaper report. But you want them to have that really strong core of narrative to be able to write lots of different types of narratives, and have that ability to be able to write in past tense, don't you? I just want to pick up on your point before about, I mean, it kind of fits really, but teachers' obsession with wanting to write lots and lots of genres. Because I mean, we've been through the national curriculum if I showed you our copy, about 1,000 times, as you will have done, and we read it from cover to cover, and there's one sentence that says children need to be able to write descriptions, explanations, narratives. I think pretty much that's it. And all of our assessment documentation says we need to be able to teach them to write for purpose and audience. So actually, I think we're with you on that point, that just strip it back and get them to do things really well. So get them to write a really great narrative.
And in terms of the time frame of that, so I'm hearing some really good things. You know, once you've said mastery, you've got a smile on my face. I'm all about mastery. And I do believe that teachers need to understand that pedagogical approach of slowing down in order to accelerate to a quality outcome rather than speeding up, trying to cram everything in. Giving that quality practice time is so key. But we've mentioned the word time. And there is a bit of a debate. You can see it on Twitter and across social media. How long should a writing block actually be? How long should we be spending on this? So certainly if we're talking about doing mini pieces of writing to practice a skill, then that certainly has an impact on the length of time dedicated to a block of writing. So let's look at obviously a creative genre. Like if a child was writing a suspense narrative or an adventure narrative, how long would you recommend teachers spend on a type of output like that?
But you want them to have that really strong core of narrative to be able to write lots of different types of narratives, and have that ability to be able to write in past tense, don't you? But you want them to have that really strong core of narrative to be able to write lots of different types of narratives, and have that ability to be able to write in past tense, don't you?
Well, all of the work that we write for teachers and work with teachers, we work on a 15 session basis. Now, we've said session because some of those might go over more than one lesson. So we really say you're giving it a good 3 to 4 weeks on a text and on your, what you say, in your block or your unit of work,
or your book
really.
focus.
Yes. So whatever your book is, on longer half terms, then obviously there's the room to extend things, but to get that real end product, like you said, your suspense narrative, we would say about 3 to 4 weeks. But within that, I think one of the differences, those practice gives children lots of opportunities, as Alison said, to write throughout. What you're not doing is waiting 3 weeks to then just suddenly have this end piece. Really, we feel that throughout those 3 to 4 weeks, the children have pretty much written it. It's just about putting it back together. So you'd spend time on the grammar and vocabulary skills you'd want for that opening for it, how you build up the character, and they would have done that throughout. And that final skill is looking again at models for your writing and piecing it all back together. And then obviously giving time afterwards to edit. So I think another thing when we're talking about children, maybe just writing creatively, putting that time into that they can reread and refine those ideas as well.
Now, another thing that teachers tend to struggle with is encouraging children to magpie. Now, obviously, magpieing is encouraged in the national curriculum. They say children should have access to word mats, creative ideas that they can grab, listening to rich text that they can hold on to that vocabulary and then use that in their writing. But some children think magpieing is actually cheating. That you put the stuff in front of them and go, okay, here's some word mats, here's some fronted adverbials, a variety of conjunctions, blah, blah, blah. And then children go, oh, I'm not going to use that, because that means that I'm not being creative. How would you suggest that we encourage children to magpie sensibly? And let's not forget parameters around magpieing so that children don't over magpie.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to, as you mentioned, the high quality text that you use in the first place and making sure that you're pointing them in the right direction of that lovely author's language. And I think it goes a long way when a teacher is enthusiastic and shows how much they love a word, a phrase, a sentence. Something I definitely recommend for those able writers and greater depth is to have a journal specifically or the back of their English book, where they are not just taking vocabulary from text, but they're looking at the grammar as well and learning how to manipulate grammar like authors. But what I think the most effective way is to actually physically use it with the children. So to do things like take words. I mean, we in our planning, we always identify high quality vocabulary from the text and then do lots of activities with it. So you might do something like, I'm going to pick a couple of words and create a scale of synonyms to antonyms for a word, so that they're talking about and using about it and almost forgetting that it's from the book because it's become something that they can, it's part of their new vocabulary, or something like a zone of relevance, and giving them 20 words and actually getting them to choose the most relevant words and keeping an eye on those. And those are the ones you want them to use in their creative writing. I think a lot of it is about precision, isn't it? And it's about getting the right word for the right time and the right purpose. So I think generally it's about, I mean, to take away the terminology magpieing in a way and just be, well, these are the great words, these are the great grammar structures. Let's see which ones are the best for the piece of writing we're doing. And I think that's probably what we would recommend.
Yes, because it's not just about grabbing anything, it's about what's best fit, isn't it? And certainly I've seen situations where teachers print off those word mats from subscribed websites, and not all of the words or the phrases fit the style of writing. And I almost feel like going, you really need to tweak that and, make it really clear. I mean, okay, we haven't all got the time to go rewriting word mats every single time we have a genre, but certainly go through the word map, block out those words that actually, I don't want you using this because this is not going to fit in the genre of writing that we're doing. Let's, see the rest of it and make it clear to the children, and then you could easily save that on your hard drive or on your cloud, so that every time you're doing that particular style of writing, that word mat's already adapted to suit your genre. So just a little bit of a tip there from me in terms of how to make sure that those resources actually match when you're getting children to Magpie.
Can I add another point as well to your point?
Yeah, go on.
Because another thing that's really useful to do is, let's say maybe you've got a word mat and you've blanked them out, and maybe you've added some from the text that you're covering. It's also worth having a little look, particularly in Key Stage 2, at which of those word list words will match with your theme, just because that vocabulary is actually brilliant. Forget it's a spelling list, the vocabulary itself is lovely, isn't it? And if you could just, as teachers, if you just pinpoint maybe 8 words maximum that you want to use a little bit more in your modelled writing in some of your activities that you're doing, then you're kind of killing two birds with one stone as well, aren't you? You're getting them to use great vocabulary, and you're also getting them to practice those spelling words in the writing a little bit more independently. So that was my other kind of bit to add to it.
Yes, absolutely. So let's just get to kind of the core principles of a good creative writing session. As a literacy consultant, what would you be saying to teachers? This is what would make a quality creative writing block of lessons. These are the kind of things that really, if anybody came into your classroom while you were doing this, they would say, this is outstanding, or this is great quality work coming from your classroom.
Well, I think some of them we've probably kind of touched on, but kind of just putting it in that sequence. As we said, everything we do is we work on that mastery approach and look at the progression of the skills. And we've said, and it's not about maybe shoehorning in a skill because it's time to do that. So we very much go also from the genre of writing. So certain grammar skills will fit, just like certain vocabulary will fit. So it's about having that clear progression and understanding initially about what you want from the children and the skills and tools that they'll need in place. Should we then start with that hook that links to the text, that links to the purpose for the writing, unpicking the vocabulary, as Alison has said, that children are going to use.
With lots of talk as well.
Yeah, lots and lots of talk and exploration about the text, really, to get them all that you would do, looking at the pictures, making those predictions around the text. So pulling out the vocabulary work. We would also want to see lots of practical activities as well. So, getting those sentence strips out, practicing writing on sentence strips, cutting them up, moving your adverbs, moving your adverbs around, making those changes to your writing. And I think you said about those those teacher models, building those up with the children. So having that gradual release to your modelled write. So at some point you do need to model it to the children, but then you've got to start pulling back on that. Otherwise, all they're going to do is copy yours, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have that gradual release to it. Where you do go through those stages where you start to get that collaborative write, and then the children joining in those shared writes. We'd also want to see the development in the working wall as well. So not having stuff up, all of it up to begin with, which I know, I used to do that your wall would be done before the children came in, but it needs to be built up in that working progress. So like I said, you can see the children's work, that final outcome being built up as you go along. And those short bursts of writing that we've talked about will still be allowing children to be creative, but they've then got that clear focus on, as Alison said, maybe we're just focusing on our noun phrases in this, and that's what you can really play with using noun phrases in this piece of writing. Right now we're going to write, we've done a setting description. What about if we're going to write a letter? Let's play with our noun phrases in the letter and still link to that text. How would they be different? And I think that's really important. And that is that mastery approach again, isn't it? That children are taking those skills, using them in different contexts. And I'd say a lot of the activities we do link to the text allow for that creativity as well. So, we have things like you might be writing instructions linked to the text as one of your short bursts of writing, taking on a role, doing role play, diary entries. So lots of elements that can feed into that final piece. And by the time you get to the final piece, that's where, as Alison said, you'd be wanting those to be being used more naturally now by the children, because they've lived it, they've practiced it, they've done their playing. And obviously, you're building in that peer assessment and that self-assessment as well as you go through.
Now, one of the things that also proves to be a challenge for children is actually conceptualizing their creative idea. They will come up with ideas that are so huge, they're out of the field completely. Do you believe that the mastery approach helps children to refine those ideas and to break them down into manageable steps? Or is it still problematic because, they're trying to use their imagination?
Yeah, I mean, it is a tricky one, because you've always got somebody, you're writing a historical fiction, and then all of a sudden Superman appears. It's just what happens, isn't it? Because children want to write what they know. What we would say is we really believe in kind of sticking to one genre in a block of writing, which most teachers do, don't they? So let's say we're building up to a story, and we want to write a really creative story, an adventure story or whatever. Everything that we would recommend is that people base it on the narrative that you've studied. So not too heavily as a model, but to actually look at the structure and spend time identifying the key events and identifying the arc of the story, and the story mounting of it, and the structure, and the point at which other characters are introduced, or the point that there's conversation going on, or the point that there's a setting introduced, so that the actual structure of the story is really quite clear. And we also love timelines. We love post-it notes, timelining events, so the children can switch and move it around. We love them being able to see it in a linear way, so that they can really think that through. And I think in terms of that big idea that you were talking about before, if you can then get them to break it down into the smaller events, and you'll recommend this as well, I'm sure, but there's still a lot of teachers who think, right, we're going to do a big write, and we're going to get there on Friday, and we're going to write for an hour. Yeah. And it's the cognitive overload for children is massive, isn't it? Yeah. Break it down, so timeline it, and then get them to plan using a similar kind of linear way, or post-it notes, or however you want to do it. Or a lot of teachers like to have like a box plan going down, don't they? And that's also great. Some people you see have a bit of a margin kind of plan. However you want to do it, but have that sequence of events, and get them to write over time, so that you can then guide them a little bit more. And help them with their idea.
And we also build in time, don't we, to make sure that they get that chance to talk through ideas with friends as well. So, you know, that paired talk throughout all the year groups, it's really important, so they can get those initial ideas out, and they can refine them, give each other feedback, relate it to the models. And as you said about maybe sometimes just getting things off the internet, it doesn't show what you want. So that's why being really careful with that model and that structure for the children to work within. And again, with story structures, we try and strip it back, you know, just a simple 3-part story for, you know, most of the younger children. You don't have to go too overly complex, do you? And then building up that structure.
So it's time for the quick chat period of Pedagogy Power. And this is all about your opinions, so don't hold back. Are you a fan of heavy marking? You know, detailed marking of writing?
Well, yeah, no. In a nutshell, no. We're a fan of anything that makes progress. So we're not a fan of anything that takes teachers loads and loads of time for children not to read it. What we think the best thing you can do with writing is to have a read of it all. First of all, read all your pupils' writing. Have a sheet or a post-it note, whatever, something to scribble some notes down that says, okay, we've been working really hard on our creativity, let's say noun phrases and fronted adverbials. This pile of children, I've done a really good job and they're great. This pile, no, we need to go back because they've forgotten to use it. This pile I'm going to have as a guided group, or we're going to have to look again. So to do that first of all, and then to also make a note of any of those in terms of the proofreading side of it. Have we got some missed apostrophes? Have we got missed commas? Have we got forgotten capital letters? Again, make a note of that, so that then at the start of the next lesson, your pupils open the books. Everybody's then kind of guided to check your capital letters and full stops, check your apostrophes, check your commas, first fix, read it to your partner, read it out loud, get them to read it, check, change anything you need to. And then we're going to have another look at our noun phrases. We're going to evaluate our work. Have you used an effective noun phrase? Tell your partner. If not, and then it just kind of moves the learning on, rather than
and that's so important for the metacognition as well. So we really want to get children to identify things for themselves, because then they're more likely to remember it, rather than everything being teacher led.
Final question: how do we get slow writers to give us more? What ideas have you got to get them to speed up?
I think for some children, I would want to kind of unpick as well why they're a bit slow writers. So we find that Is it that they've got, haven't got effective handwriting strategies? And sometimes we look at the book, but look at the child. Look at how the child's sitting. Look at how they're holding their pen and pencil. Have they got that effective way of writing? But also, I think some of the things that we've talked about in terms of building up takes some of that fear away from children. So when they're just given a blank page, that can be really hard to put pen to paper. So going back to the whole process that we've talked about, they're building that up, and they know that it's there for them to draw upon. So I think part of it's taking that fear away. I don't know if you have any other ideas for slow writers.
What I've had, I worked with a teacher in a year 2 class, and she was struggling to get, the stamina was poor, and all I said to her, and it worked really nicely for her class, and it's not anything new, was to take a couple of pictures from the text, just a small one to stick in the margin, and then almost use colours. I want you to tell me about what the weather's like, and then I want you to tell me what the character's doing, and then I want you to tell me about the setting, for like 2 and 3 pictures. So they didn't have to think too hard about what was required in the structure.
Again, it's safe, isn't it? It's safe. You're giving them boundaries, and you're giving them ways to be successful then as well, aren't you? So that they can put that system in place for other types of writing.
So thank you so much, Sian and Allison from the Literacy Company, for all that wealth of knowledge and advice. And I'm certain that teachers are going to benefit from this episode. And certainly we'll be putting your contact details in the video, so that if anybody wants to reach out to the Literacy Company, they can do so. Thank you again for joining us on Pedagogy Power in Primary English.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Thank you once again for having us.
Thank you. It's been lovely to chat.
Bye-bye.
Bye.